so much, Wes, and to Jimmy as well, who's providing tech support on the back end there. And I also wanted to say a special thanks also to Tej, who's representing the Minorities in International Law Interest Group. He has been a fantastic partner in putting this fantastic event together. And it's wonderful that we're able to have so many incredible women that I have known or long admired for most of my career joining us today. So in order to give us as much time as possible for discussion and also for questions from the audience, I will do a very brief highlight of each of our speakers today. And I'll also post their bios in the chat box so you all can read a little bit more about them. So first, I'll start with Sar Mohammadi, who is the director of MENA and South Asia at the Center for Civilians in Conflict, or CIVIC. She leads advocacy and strategy on civilian protection and engages governments and armed actors on civilian harm mitigations and practices and policies during all phases of operations. Next, we have Mona Rishmawi, who is a human rights lawyer, currently serving as the chief of the Rule of Law, Equality and Non-Discrimination branch of the Office of the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights, or OHCHR. And her legal expertise relates to human rights and armed conflict, transitional justice and accountability, detention, women's human rights, and the protection of minorities. Melida Hodgson is a partner and chair of the New York International Arbitration Practice at Jenner & Block, and she focuses her practice on investor, state, and commercial arbitrations, counseling governments and state-owned entities, as well as corporate entities, with respect to international investment protection provisions, business disputes, and World Trade Organization dispute resolution and international trade policy issues. And then finally, Karen Stevens currently serves as the Senior Policy Counsel and Coordinator in the Civil Rights Division at the U.S. Department of Justice in the division's international program, with more than 20 years of experience working closely with the department's Office of International Affairs and the Office of Legal Policy, the State Department, and other federal agencies, and advocates on the reporting and implementation of international human rights treaties ratified by the United States, and also provides advice to the department components and the U.S. State Department on domestic civil rights matters that might impact the U.S. foreign relations interests. So while I post these in the chat box, maybe, Sar, we could start with you, just a very quick 3 to 4 minutes of a little bit of background on your overall history, how you got to where you are. We don't need to go into super detail because we'll get more into that in the questions, but wanted to give you a little bit of an opportunity to share some highlights on your end. And then maybe we can then move next to Mona, Melida, and Karen after that.
Thanks, Christy. And yes, I look forward to questions from the participants and the attendees. So my career trajectory, I mean, this is sort of dating me, but I mean, when I was in college, you know, the events were taking place in Rwanda and Yugoslavia, and I was really moved, and I said, I want to work on international human rights and accountability and justice for war crimes. I then graduated from my graduate college. I worked at Human Rights Watch for a couple of years, and that sort of cemented my interest in going to law school. And while I was in law school, I was a public interest fellow. I went to China looking at the criminal procedural law issues. And when I was graduating from law school, September 11th happened. And so, you know, a lot of us in this space, you know, our careers also sort of really reacted to the events on that day. And I went to work with the International Rescue Committee. I worked on the Afghan-Pakistan border. We were, you know, processing Afghans fleeing armed conflict issues. And I had to come back and take my bar exam. And I had this really nice job at a law firm set up, which I was, you know, it was a terrific experience, you know, working at a law firm. I think it really teaches you time management. Although I spent many hours doing document review and representing big pharma in products liability litigation. But I was very lucky, like a lot of law firms have amazing pro bono opportunities. And I had worked on asylum cases, but then I also worked on amicus briefs challenging the constitutionality of the Patriot Act, Section 215 specifically. my law firm and Judge Gibbons, he argued the Boumediene case in the US Supreme Court on the right to habeas for Guantanamo detainees. And so I was able to work on those projects when I was only in a law firm for 2 years though. And I think the partner I worked with, she knew where my interests lay. And so I was, again, very lucky to make a transition. And I had a fellowship in Human Rights Watch. And then I was working on counterterrorism, human rights violations during counterterrorism operations, looking at Malaysia and in Pakistan in particular. And then after my fellowship ended, I switched to Human Rights First, and I really focused on looking at US counterterrorism policies in Guantanamo. I was looking at torture issues, rendition. I spent a lot of time in Guantanamo observing military commission hearings. And I then afterwards left Human Rights First and moved to Civic, where I currently have been for over 8 years, and more broadly focusing on international armed conflict and conduct of hostilities issues, where we do a lot of trainings and engagement with militaries on how to better protect civilians during all phases of operations. So most of the militaries that I engage with are non-Western militaries, so in Afghanistan, Iraq, Syria, and Yemen. And again, raising awareness on IHL issues, but how to implement it. So I'll just sort of stop there, just a quick rundown, and happy to answer questions.
Thank you. Maybe Mona, we'll turn next to you.
Thank you so much. I think our careers are not so different. I also have a mixed career. I also started international as a lawyer. In my first year of legal practice, I started volunteering for a national human rights organization. And that, I was doing commercial. I was mostly doing, things that have very little to do with what I do today. I did that for 10 years. But meanwhile, I always had on the side being involved in rights, and I became more and more interested. The more I did it, the more I became thinking like, I want to do commercial law, but perhaps the most interesting part for me personally was the direct links with people and systems, being able to help with my expertise. And then I moved from the national level to the international level, and I moved to the national and there I started working. I became the director of the Independence and Lawyers, and here I am, all of a sudden, like 30 something, and I am dealing with the chief justice in so many countries, working with really pioneering judges and lawyers who I had the privilege to work with them, and for them to explain to me what was going on in their mind, their career, and why they ruled the way they ruled, and so on. So I became more and more interested in the legal protection of human rights. And I really saw that these people had a specific role to play really in advancing human rights. So while seeing it at the national level and talking to the people, the judges and lawyers, and distinguished judges and lawyers at the international level, I became a lot more involved in what they do and the way of thinking. And it took me to the United Nations. And at the time I was in Geneva, and it was a lot of work around judges and lawyers who are harassed and persecuted. Defense lawyers were basically identified with their clients. And we wanted something to happen, so we were pushing the United Nations to do something for it. So I became an advocate and lobbyist, judges, lawyers in the United Nations, and that took me to a different level. So I became very aware of the human rights mechanisms, human rights work of the nations. And then I was chosen to be the independent expert in Somalia. So I go back to Somalia, and I go back to at the national level, and then I saw something that was really, again, very empowering. People had no say to take care of them. How do they actually how do they actually attain their rights, and what do they do? So it became both intellectual as well as very personal and emotional, wanting to help people, but also seeing issues that I wanted really to work with and solve. And around that time, believe it or not, I applied like everybody else, for a job at the United Nations that I thought I would never get, but I got it. And I became an advisor and then a manager in the United Nations. And I had incredible opportunities in the United Nations. So I had a huge privilege to be the executive director of the Inquiry on Darfur, had the first referral of a situation to the International Criminal Court. So I'm extremely privileged to do that. I served in Iraq. I worked a lot in Sri Lanka and a number of countries, situations of conflict. And now I feel it's almost like a full circle because I worked at the national level. I went back and forth between national and international. I feel like I have this. I am able to relate to both. I can see both, and I can see the points of views of legal systems, of lawyers. I can put myself in the thinking of a judge and how would the judge see the situation. So I think this mixed career to me was really what helped me the most in my career, and frankly, that's what I recommend. So I will speak a bit about that later in the.
Fantastic, thank you. And Mona, just maybe for the next time we come around, there's a bit of a challenge in the sound. So if you have headphones or something, you might want to get those if that's at all possible. So Melida, over to you, and then we'll have Karen.
Sure, thank you. So mine is going to sound very different from Sahar and Mona. After law school graduation, went to work at a big law firm it was called commercial litigation. Let me just say as a little bit of a background in college and also to the extent possible in law school, I had very much focused on international issues because I was born in Nicaragua, and for me that was always a way of sort of maintaining my identity. Certainly when I immigrated to the United States, I was 10 years old, and I think probably younger people today take it very much for granted, as much as it's a bit of a challenge at times in our current environment. Really, there was not a lot of multiculturalism, I would say. People's from all over, but I lived in a little bit of a microcosm when I moved because my father was a doctor, and so we were with Jamaicans, Filipinos, Indians, and that was very comforting. But once you get out into the rest of the United States as a young child, 40 years ago, the environment was very different. And it was not something that was celebrated. You couldn't find the foods that you like to eat back home. Whereas today, for the most part, at least in a big city, you have that option. So that really formed me in what I wanted to do with my career. And before law school, I was actually a banker for a few years because I wanted to practice Latin American banking, international banking, of course, given my background, but that was not a very auspicious time for that kind of banking. We had come through one of the many debt crises, and there was not a lot of lending being done there. And I also learned from that, in my view, that a law career in law offered much more flexibility to be able to do anything that you wanted. You could be a banker if you wanted, but you couldn't do it the opposite way. So with that sort of framing, I went to work for a big law firm that had offices all over the world. However, I liked litigation, and if you liked litigation, you weren't really going anywhere. If you did corporate work, you might get sent abroad, but all of that, sort of factored into a decision at some point that yes, I did indeed, really love being an advocate. And after working on, just by chance, really an arbitration, I decided I would try to sort of hone my skills, as a lot of people who go to law firms do at some point. They move into the government to get sort of real experience, because you start in the government and you will get work. They're your cases. Go ahead, run them, and you will interview the experts. You will, be the person speaking at trial. You will be in charge, as opposed to writing memos and sort of supporting others. So at some point, though, and I was at DOJ in civil litigation, commercial litigation, so essentially defending the government in a number of cases, usually cases having to do with contracts that the government had entered into, and for one reason or another, it had not gone well. And it was also a slower pace than I expected for several reasons, which was unusual at the Department of Justice, and I'm sure Karen can speak to that. But I sort of thought, okay, I really want to get back to international. And so I then joined the Office of the U.S. Trade Representative, where I was able to work on international litigation, international arbitration. A lot of it was sort of the first few years after the now much maligned World Trade Organization had gotten going. The position then of the U.S. government was very favorable towards it. We were sort of doing novel, really arbitrations, but called dispute settlement. And we were sort of setting the way things were going to be done. I was privileged to work on a number of proceedings that were really sort of the first that people were doing. And eventually also worked on negotiations of free trade agreements, revising the model bilateral investment treaty of the United States back in 2004, in response to a lot of the criticisms that continued into the last administration, actually. And so really got to see the process from creating the kinds of provisions that then result essentially in litigation arbitration. And so after about 9 years in the government, I decided I wanted to go back out into the private sector and to focus on arbitration. One of the world had changed in the time that I had been in the government. Before I left to go to the government, I had the opportunity to work on an arbitration that really the reason I had that opportunity was because I spoke Spanish. And when I was leaving the government, it was sort of the dawn of the ending, or the midlife, I guess, of the cases, the investment arbitration cases against Argentina, and the beginning of the cases against Venezuela. And I ended up working, I went to a firm called Foley Hoag. Eventually, I spent a few years at a more international trade firm. But then I spent time working on a lot of Venezuela cases. And that essentially has been my path. I left Foley Hoag about 2 years almost now, and continue to work primarily on investment arbitrations, but also on commercial arbitrations, and also have begun to spend more time sitting as an arbitrator.
Great, thanks. And so Karen, over to you. I think it's a great segue over to our government speaker.
Sure. It's all really interesting. I did not start out, with the goal of doing international work, and it is one of 4 or 5 things that I work on in my job, but it's a big piece of it. When I graduated from law school, I joined the Department of Justice, the beginning of the Clinton administration, because someone I had worked with my second summer at the University of North Carolina was heading the Office of Legal Counsel at Justice, and I graduated early, and it was another transition, and they needed people quickly, and I joined. And I ended up staying at the Department of Justice, and I'm still there. That was also something I would not have predicted when I came out of law school 25 years ago. But I've moved around a lot in the department, and I moved to the Civil Rights Division at the end of the Clinton administration, and worked in a policy role in their leadership office, supervising or helping to supervise appellate matters and education and civil rights matters. I then spent some time in our appellate section and in our disability rights section doing regulatory work and appeals. Unlike Melida, I knew pretty early I did not want to be a trial litigator. My skills and my temperament were elsewhere. And so I've been almost anywhere you could be in the civil rights division and not actually run a trial. And another transition story, I guess, at the beginning of the Obama administration, I moved back to our front office to help with the interim period while the appointees were coming in. And one of my colleagues there, Julie Fernandez, had worked on international matters for the Leadership Conference on Civil and Human Rights before she came into the department. And so she was very focused on the human rights lens for our work. The United States had also left the UN Human Rights Council during the Bush administration. And so the incoming State Department was very focused on rejoining the council and demonstrating our commitment, both in Geneva and at the UN and also at home. And so they reached out to DOJ for several things in that first year to do a side event at the first session of the UN Human Rights Council with Assistant Secretary Esther Brimmer. And there were very few people in the department at that point because it was pretty thinly staffed. And so they asked me to go since I had been at the department for a while and worked in a lot of different areas and had a broad perspective on what the division did. And so that was my very first human rights assignment. And I went over to Geneva for about a week. And again, did a side event, attended some sessions, met with a lot of the people at the mission staff. And then the United States had our first review on the Universal Periodic Review in 2010. And this was another area where the administration and the State Department wanted to, again, demonstrate, because it was our first round and because they wanted to help set an example for the type of review that they hoped other countries would participate in. They put a lot of effort into it. We held, and we worked with them very closely. We had, I think, 10 consultations, of 1 or 2 days each on different areas all over the country. I worked on one on housing issues in Chicago. That was 2 days at the University of Chicago Kent Law School that has a great international clinic and program. And some others in DC. There were, consultations on the Texas border and the Rio Grande on immigration, on a native reservation in California. And then we came to Geneva for the actual Universal Periodic Review with a very large delegation of almost 25 or 30 government officials and advocates from all of the different agencies. And following up on the Universal Periodic Review at the request of advocates, they asked us to form some implementation works and continue to work and consult with them. And so I helped lead a couple of the implementation groups for the Justice Department and the Civil Rights Division. And we did a really interesting consultation on domestic violence and preventing sexual assaults and looking at it through a human rights lens based on the case of Jessica Gonzalez, who had sued the United States, and some of the advocates at the Columbia Law School Human Rights Clinic and elsewhere that had worked with her. And so I've really been working with a lot of people to try and bridge, I guess, that divide is not the right word, but there's the human rights posture of the US in international organizations overseas, and sort of trying to link that to the civil and human rights work that we do in the US and implementation, and trying to knit together what the benefits are and the places we can learn from each other, the US advocates and others. So that's how I wound up. And from there, I've done a variety of other things. I met Christy working as a hate crimes national point of contact at the OSCE, which grew out of some of the work that I did on those earlier events. And that's been fascinating. I've learned a lot. And a great team there. And we've also been able to connect with some of our counterparts in Canada and Sweden on some statistics and data collection and specialized units matter. So that's a little bit of what I've done. And I'm happy to
Great.
answer questions and talk more about other parts of the department that have international work.
Fantastic, thank you. And it's great to hear also how many things you all have in common, but then also some of the very different experiences that you all bring together in very different sectors. So maybe just to start off our discussion, it would be great if maybe each of you could share what are maybe the 2 or 3 specific skill sets for jobs either in your sector that, or generally as a practicing attorney that you would recommend for folks to develop. You certainly don't have to list all of them, but maybe just some of the top ones that you've noticed over the course of your careers. Maybe Mona, let's start with you this time, and we can do a little bit of a different order just to shake things up a little bit.
Okay, so can you hear me well now?
Oh, that's
Okay.
perfect. Great.
Okay, so I just need, sorry, maybe my face will become too big for the camera, but I'm coming closer to the mic.
Perfect.
So for skill sets, I think for me, the first one is really to take international law seriously. I think international law is really seen as a light area where I think there is a lot of complexity in international law. And if you want to be a good human rights lawyer, you have to be a good international lawyer. So, and I think they go hand in hand. So I think you should really take it, it's not enough to know, to have your gut feeling about it. You need to know the principles and rules and how they are applied. And the best way to start there is to read the jurisprudence of international tribunals. Yeah, reading the jurisprudence and really putting yourself in the mind of a judge of what kind of things they evaluate and value is really important. So I would start with that. The second thing I would say that is really essential, frankly, is to be curious. Is not to think, to continue to be curious and to challenge yourself to be curious. When you read a newspaper item and not to be afraid to just say, okay, how does this play out in law? And what does it mean? This problem that I am reading about, what does it mean in law? And to be curious and to push yourself to apply law all the time. So I think that's the other thing. And the third, in my area, really, frankly, and honestly, to believe in equality and dignity. If you don't believe in equality and dignity of everyone, don't start in human rights, because it's very easy to basically look at, go to situations where people are a lot less privileged than you are. And it's really so important to realize, even if they are poor, less privileged, not the same social status, not the same education, not the same perspective, their dignity is essential. And if you don't think of that and put it at the forefront of your work, I don't think you can succeed as a human rights lawyer. So I would prioritize these 3 things. Sharpen your skills as an international lawyer. Be curious and apply it, and have compassion and believe in dignity.
Those are very, very good recommendations. Melida, can I turn to you next?
Sure, and I share some of what Mona said. I mean, a lot of the work that I do is representing governments that are being sued by investors. Oftentimes, quite frankly, the investors have they have sort of financially, their resources are much more ample than the governments that we represent, which can be a challenge when you're at a law firm. You really do, one of the things that I try to bring is to have that sort of respect and dignity. One of the things that being in a world where, quite frankly, most of the judges, the arbitrators, are men and white and older, one of the things you're doing when you're agreeing to or choosing arbitrators is to try to find people who are going to be, if not sympathetic, empathetic, but at least open or respectful. It's one of the issues that, you know, like everybody else, frankly, after the George Floyd murder, everybody in every field is re-examining itself and trying to be more diverse, et cetera, et cetera. And that's a fantastic thing. We've been trying to do that in international arbitration also. But what it really goes back to is what Mona said, which is having empathy, having respect, empathy, and dignity. Just because somebody's in a different circumstance from what you're used to doesn't mean they're any less deserving of that. And frankly, I not to go off on a tangent, I think in our own country, some of the things we've experienced probably go back to that. But in terms of, you know, I look at it more from a skill set standpoint, and you need to develop litigation skills to be an international arbitration practitioner. So, you know, I often tell there's students who, you know, they're not in an international arbitration practice and they want to figure out, what do I do to be able to set myself up for possibly making a transition? And it's really having good writing skills, good analytical skills. And I put those all in one basket. It's just critical because you're advocating. And so you need to be able to analyze and write well. I would also say, related to that, and something that I think in our, I'm not even on Instagram, but let's say Instagram, Twitter world, attention to detail. You know, I spend a lot of time when I'm writing emails. I find them very frustrating because it's like, I will go back and correct if something is not right. I don't write in shorthand. And I think that's just, frankly, an age issue. But where that becomes an issue for younger practitioners is they've grown up, I think, with a more casual style of writing. And sometimes that blends over into professional life. And so that is something that I really always have to remind associates in particular, is the importance of attention to detail. I would say also being a good communicator. I don't know what you're thinking. I'm thinking about 50 million different things. So you need to communicate. And if I, you know, ask for something, then, you know, don't assume that I know that I know what you're doing, and I don't want to find out 2 days later that, oh, well, no, we miscommunicated. So, you know, I think those are things for any career perhaps, but really important in a career where you're, you know, oftentimes, frankly, we're doing things on budgets. And so even more important, but people are paying at a law firm, people are paying a lot of money for your services, probably outsized to what the value of your services are. That's what some clients say. And so you have to be the best that you can be. And those are some of the skills that I think are important.
Absolutely. And definitely in any sector in international law, and I'm sure most other types of professional positions as well. Sarah, maybe we could move next to you.
Yeah, I agree with all that was said. Just to add a little bit is be professional, you know? I mean, take the time to be professional in how you appear, your thoughts, your commitment to whatever you're doing. And it does come through when we don't have that sort of approach. You know, try to be, you know, again, I said curiosity, or, you know, but validating other people's viewpoints is also, I think, very, very important. I mean, I don't do litigation anymore, but I spend a lot of my time convincing an armed actor to not kill that many civilians. And I have to hear their point of view, like, well, that's our military objective. We're going to be killing the Islamic State and Al-Qaeda, and we have our blind, you know, and I was like, okay, you don't have to have your blinders on. It's like, no, we are adhering to the law of armed conflict, but I said, no, what more could you do? So hearing their perspective informs your ability to advocate and do better and move your goal. And you just cannot expect that your view is going to be somebody else's viewpoint. So listening really is important. and having a sense of humility about it. We don't know everything, and we may disagree, and it's fine to disagree. I think it's really important to just to have different viewpoints, but have the humility to listen, and then, but also have confidence, right? I mean, you also should have confidence in who you are, that you're prepared, that nobody can challenge and undermine your experience and your viewpoint because of your gender, your race. And I mean, frankly, most of the work that I do, I'm like the only woman in those meetings, in those rooms. I mean, it's with special forces or the Afghan military, or in Yemen with militias, and I'm the only woman. And a lot of times the question is like, well, how do you know this? You're a woman, or you've never served in the military, and what would you know about these things? And how are you prepared to answer those questions? Very professional, but also just say, my gender has nothing to do with this. I know what I'm talking about. So again, that preparation, having the confidence, I think is very important. And I agree with, everything else that my co-panelists said. So I don't want to take up too much time with this.
Perfect. Thank you. Karen.
Yeah, I don't know that there's too much to add. I think writing has been critical in every legal and other job that I've had. And to really take the time in school and your early jobs to find out who's considered a good writer, wherever you are in your organization, and to read that writing and understand what makes it good, and to have a real model, I think helps a lot, and to take feedback and ask for as much feedback as you can get. As an appellate lawyer early, I think, we used to say that, we didn't really know if we had the right argument until we saw how it wrote. And I think the rigor that comes from writing, I miss it sometimes because I'm not doing that. But even if you're not, to really write something through disciplines you and reveals the strengths and weaknesses, I think, of your position, and the questions that are going to be asked, or that you should be asking, in a way that it's hard to do in any other setting. I would say, for me, being in the United States government and being domestically based, and that being my primary focus, I think what Sar said about really listening to other people and understanding their position, a lot of what my work involves is really the way that the United States interprets the treaties that we sign, and international law, and especially when we're operating in the United States. It's not seen, the human rights principles are not seen as mandatory or obligatory in the same way that US law is in what we do here. And I've come to learn that that's very different, and I understand the frustration that a lot of advocates and others feel, because in the European Union or in many other countries, those treaties and the international laws that flow from that really do control and guide in a way that they just do not in the view of the United States government. But I think trying to understand, why those, why those treaties are written the way they're written, and why those principles are important, and finding similar values and connections in our own laws, and being able to make those connections for people, that we're not asking you to do something foreign or other, that this is very consistent with the principles that we do, even if it's not exactly the same, and the benefits of it. I've really tried to move toward bringing people that are working on problems and helping people together, because, I tell my colleagues, the same way that we can learn from, people, the way that people are approaching a problem in Texas versus Oregon versus Florida, we can also learn from what, very smart, dedicated, experienced program and human rights and international lawyers are doing in Canada, in Belgium, in Belize. And so I think for me, sort of trying to strip away some of the legal terms and the technicalities and the desire to make things obligatory, and to get at what's really going to help people do their job better, and helping people, has been key. And listening and sort of peeling through that and finding connections is very important.
Terrific. The next question I have, which is also actually quite similar to one in the Q&A, and please do continue to put your questions in the Q&A box there. But given that we're now in a primarily remote working environment and we're not able to go to networking or in-person types of events the way we used to be able to do, and this, I'll just throw this open to all four of you, whomever would like to respond. Do you have any suggestions or advice for people either coming out of law school or who might be looking for a career transition on how to make the most of networking opportunities when you can't necessarily go to an in-person coffee meeting anymore, or go to a conference like you might have used to have done? If you have any thoughts around that. So I'll let any of you jump in if you'd like. And please do keep the questions coming from the audience too.
I think that in some ways this environment has opened up some opportunities. There are a lot of things that are offered virtually that you would have had to attend in person before. And so I would say don't discount in this environment the Zoom meetings. I think, again, going back to what Melida and Sar was saying about a professional email and, following up, with a thank you and a question, and really trying to tie it to something specific beyond just I'm interested in international law, but sort of going at least to that next level to connect it to something that the speaker spoke about or a question that you have. I've found that people are more interested in engaging and following up when there are specific questions and you share with them some of what you hope to learn and how you can use it or how you might be able to help them, as opposed to a general, I'm interested in international law, I would love to talk to you sometime. So I think that would be my thought. And that's true in person as well.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Go ahead, Sahar, because
No, please, you go ahead.
The question in the chat, I think, went more to your and Mona's work. So I'll just say briefly, totally agree with Karen that, I get emails all the time, and, certainly at a law firm last year, all law firms basically froze hiring. And so I understand the person said that it's been a little bit disheartening. Yes, but we've been there before. Quite frankly, in 2008, I felt so bad for people graduating in 2009, 2010. There just were not jobs. I don't think this is, I think that this is sort of a temporal thing, and the economy is going to get better once we take care of the big problem. And so you just have to keep at it. But the other thing that I would say about that is just everybody knows what's happening right now. The most important thing I think is to try to get skills whatever way you can, to build, to keep learning, and so much is offered on virtually that you can do that. But no one's going to look at your resume and say, oh, you didn't work in 2021 or 2020 and go like, what's wrong with this person? No, everybody knows what's going on. So Sahar.
Yeah, and so maybe because there's another specific question here in the chat about specifically looking at human rights opportunities, and Mona, if you have any thoughts too, if you have any specific advice on that front.
Yeah, I think just to add to what was just said, that in this time, if you look for opportunities, when I look at my career, it's like, oh, there was the wars were happening in Rwanda and Yugoslavia. So I'm like, oh, maybe I want to get exposure to those issues, so research and learn and get internships or volunteer opportunities. Or September 11th happened, and then I was at a law firm, so I was trying to pivot to getting exposure to learn doing pro bono work. So I think with COVID and we are home, but again, there's so many webinars, and you should attend one on ASIL that we're doing on COVID and human rights, because I put that panel together. But it's about learning and building your sort of exposure and knowledge base, and then in terms of offering volunteer opportunities where it's necessary, you know, writing a paper or an article or putting a panel where you can say that you're trying to do, you're learning about the topic. You don't have to be an expert. I think being a generalist and having the lawyer analytical mind is such a huge advantage, because you know how to do research, you know how to do, you have critical thinking skills. And I think those can be applied and you can pivot and pitch that way. But, you know, there's so much happening now with COVID, climate change. I mean, I'm trying to integrate that in my work in terms of climate change as a driver to violence and how I can influence armed actors to be prepared to respond to it and not harm civilians. So I think there are a lot of opportunities that you can bring your core skill sets as lawyers to these different emerging issues that are happening and apply an international law lens to it. One thing about volunteerism, I have to say, and this is something that we have conversations about, it's, you know, is that, you know, unpaid internships and how, you know, or volunteerism and who can afford to be a volunteer. I mean, fine, some of you, if you're already working and you want to pivot, you can, but if you just graduated, you've got a lot of debt. I mean, who has, you know, you want to get a paid job. And then sometimes there are race and gender issues and economic, social status issues that fall in, where all of the people who are getting these really interesting internships or volunteer opportunities, you know, they have another source of income that they can rely on. So, I mean, even at Civic, we're having these conversations about, you know, are we being very, you know, if you're having unpaid internships, is that you are leaving out an entire network of people out there who cannot afford to take an unpaid internship, so they cannot put an international experience on their CV to build that up. So, you know, it's for us, as you know, in the NGO world, also being very cognizant about these things, because that is, I think we have to give opportunities to people from diverse backgrounds who may not think about careers in international law, because a lot of it is, you know, initially is unpaid and volunteer.
Completely agree. Mona, was there anything that you wanted to add?
Yeah, thank you very much. Just a few quick points. I agree with a lot of what was said, but I think first, there are a lot of opportunities right now, and I think this situation, although, you know, I'm working from home, we have a number of interns who are actually working from home. But I want to, and working from remote places. But what I want to basically stress is two things now. For the United Nations in particular, it's not an entry point situation. We normally ask for 3 to 5 years of experience. So the question, if you are interested in joining the United Nations, I would do two things. One is to decide, okay, if I want to do that, how do I build this experience? What do I need to do? What are the skills that I bring to the table? And that you can do, and that's why I was stressing at the beginning a mixed career. Because if you come, you write today and to say, I just graduated, and a lot of people do that. I just graduated. Do you have opportunities? If you look at our website, it will say 3 to 5 years minimum of experience for an entry level. So that you need to keep in mind. Where do you develop these first years of experience? And I think, so we have something called UN Volunteers, and I'm going to post now for everyone the website on the UN Volunteers. And I would think that would be useful. And there you'll find that skills that are needed are, you can build on. So language skills, someone who, you know, we need someone who can speak Spanish, who works in this particular area and do something. I think this you can work with. Internships you can work with, but where I would concentrate right now, I would concentrate a lot as an entry level. I would concentrate a lot on on being a lawyer, because that's an important legal skill that you need to have, and it will help you in your career. It's a very important legal skill. And I would concentrate also on being a lawyer if you want in a national human rights organization or an international human rights organization, perhaps supporting, doing two things at the same time. doing your lawyering stuff, but also supporting, having, this outward look to say at the end of the day, I'm doing this, but I want to do something else. And maybe the last thing I wanted to, I would say is that on this one is that, a lot of people now, go in and out of private sector, government, international organizations. They mix their careers, and that's very attractive. And this mix is attractive because it gives you new skills. It gives you different ways of looking at the same problem. And I think that I would look what is the mixture that I want to have, rather than, and take the opportunities. Don't say, oh no, I don't want to be a lawyer. This is too domestic. My dream is to travel the world and do. Maybe you will not get that this year, but maybe next year you'll get something else. So the more you develop your skills, the more you'll be attractive. Yeah, I'll stop there.
Okay, great. So there's a couple different questions regarding internships, fellowships, how to make yourself more attractive. Obviously, with the job market being what it is, it's so competitive. And how do you stand out in either an application process or an interview process? And I would say maybe not just in interviews or internships or fellowships, but for people looking for any sort of job transition. What stands out to you, and what makes great candidates for any of these kinds of positions? And again, I'll throw it out to any of you who might want to answer, since we're coming short on time here, and I don't want to run out.
Yeah, I think I have not hired very many interns in an international context, more just in the civil rights. I would say for the Justice Department, though, there are more places that do international work than you expect. And so I can put some of them in the chat and not list here, but I would say, do your research and find, the right office and the right section that at least has that as part of what they do. And then if you can, as Mona was saying, talk about the collective experience that you bring to that, the skills and other places where you've demonstrated, we use this phrase in the Civil Rights Division a lot, demonstrated interest and commitment, and that could be classes you took, it could be research you did with a professor, an article or the journals you're on, your activities, your summers, but there are a lot of ways to demonstrate that this is something that you are seriously exploring and want to spend a lot of time working on and developing. And I think we look at that, and that's what we get a lot of candidates that are good writers and have good grades. We do try to be conscious, as Sarah was saying, about not overweighting unpaid experiences that may not be available. And I would say explain that, in your cover letter. If you really wish that you could have taken that unpaid internship, with a human rights organization, but your family needed your financial contribution or you had a health. For us, I would say that in your cover letter. Then you can look at it that way. And I'm happy to provide to Christy or type in some of the other places at the department that do hires. One I'll just say quickly is the Criminal Division Office of International Affairs is a fairly large section. And they usually have at least one or two, it looks like, early entry law students or lawyers who are helping staff various functions and stay for a couple of years and then go on to somewhere else.
Yeah, I would just say very quickly, just echo what Karen said about doing your research. I sometimes get sort of notices people I'm interested in a career in international law. I have a very specific field in international law, and quite honestly, I don't have the time to tell you whether you should be an international lawyer. You need to figure out what you want to do, research it, and then if you're interested in practicing international arbitration, here are the things that I'm doing or have done, and is this enough, and how should I better prepare myself? But that goes also to the demonstrated interest. And so I know certain kinds of resumes when I look, if you have gone through 3 years of law school and you haven't taken an international law class, it's going to be tough, because there are people who have done classes, there are people who are at certain law schools that can send them to the ICJ for a year, for example, or send them to international organizations for a summer. So you have to, if you're in law school, take advantage of any opportunities that there are. If you're out of law school, then think about what do I really want to do, and how do I get some of these additional skills? I'll let somebody else speak.
As a follow-up question, or sorry, go ahead, Mona, go ahead.
Yeah, be specific. If you are like, for example, I would like someone to work with me on an issue. I would look for someone who wrote a paper, or who took a class, or who thought about something. So just say, I worked on this method. I wrote this paper. Attach your work with it. So it's not enough to say, I am passionate about something. I want to work on women's rights and so on, because the competition is very high. So you look for people who can contribute. So demonstrate that you can contribute to the overall goal, either through sharing information or saying something very specific about why you want to do this and what's your perspective for it. I think you'll find a lot of people who would be very happy to help you.
I do recognize we're at 7 o'clock my time, 1 o'clock your time. So if any of our panelists do have to hop off, we have been given the go-ahead from the ASIL side to stay on a few minutes longer, so we can continue just for maybe 1 or 2 more questions if you all are free. Otherwise, if you do need to get back to work, we totally understand. We do have another couple of questions here regarding the trade-off between further education or hands-on experience working full-time, and if you see positive benefits either way. And I just want to also flag for those of you who are in the audience, for those of you who might be interested in pursuing academic careers, while we don't have any full-time academics on the panel today, we do have Nyenke and Milena from the co-chairs for the WILIG WILIG interest group, who are both professional academics and would be happy to answer any of your questions as well. So if any of you have any thoughts, again, back to the pursuing an LLM or a further law degree versus going into full-time work, that would be great if you could share your thoughts there too.
Sure, I'm going to have to drop off, so I'm going to just say quickly that if you are, for example, an American student or a lawyer and thinking about trying to shift into having more of an international, absolutely look at opportunities abroad. The biggest difference you're going to find is if you're at a US law firm or a major US law firm, there's going to be a huge differential in income, obviously. But frankly, sometimes, I think even if you're, I'll say, just an American, living in certain European countries, I think you get access to free healthcare regardless of whether or not, so to the extent that so much of what comes out of our paychecks is because we go it alone in this country, you may find that less income in another country is not the end of the world. But absolutely think about getting the foreign LLM experience. You may find that from that experience, foreign LLM, or for example, in terms of for work at law firms, there tends to be internships or 6-month traineeships, as opposed to here we hire people, and that's it, you're in. It's a different system. And people sometimes do multiple traineeships at different firms. But absolutely get that experience, because quite frankly, that may open doors for you that you aren't thinking about because you're used to thinking about it the way you're funneled to do things in US law schools. So I'm sorry, I have a pleading on Monday and I am way behind reviewing. So
thank you so much for joining us.
Take care all. Great to see you, Karen. And
Sahar, Karen, or Mona, do you, if you don't have something that, or Mona, please go ahead if you'd like to answer. I think you're still muted, I believe.
No, I was just saying it's okay to take some more questions, actually.
Okay. Oh, perfect. Let's see. So some of the questions have been on language skills, and in your experience, either French or Spanish, are there any particular language skills that you would recommend that have been particularly helpful?
I would say in my experience, more what I've seen with my colleagues at the State Department, there certainly are opportunities at the Organization, of American States and the Inter-American Human Rights Commission that require Spanish. And I don't know that, and it's, so you would need it. It would definitely be a plus. And I think they strongly prefer, and Melida's gone, I would imagine, again, working in Latin America and South America. I have not, at the State Department, it seems more to be part of working at Post than being an international lawyer per se. A lot of the legal advisors at the State Department do not have language skills. I'm sure it would be helpful though. And I would say the same thing at the Justice Department. It would certainly be a plus, but I think because we're generalist, we tend to work with a lot of different countries. And so we aren't focused on just one area or region. We have, the Justice Department does have a position called a residential legal advisor, where they bring in people on details to go work for the Justice Department in embassies overseas. A lot of them are tied to national security positions. Sometimes they have a specific focus. So I think there, again, it would be a plus if you wanted to work in a certain region, to be able to speak the language there. But other than those positions, most people are generalists and rely on the fact that most other people, speak English well enough to work with us, or we have interpreters or local counsel.
Maybe just to say, at the United Nations, language is always an advantage. There is no disadvantage over language. So the bringing in your, putting in your CV that you speak or you can communicate or you are fluent in multiple languages will always work. We work in 3 main languages, English definitely, but French and Spanish, and this is very helpful. But we also work in Arabic, Russian, and Chinese. So if you know Chinese, that's helpful. If you know Russian, that's helpful. If you know Arabic, that's helpful. So highlight that. Even if you kind of beginners, just say, I took several courses, I understand notions of, I think that's really, really helpful. I would also, the other thing that is interesting now, as I think it was said before, a lot of people have, people are looking for diversity, especially in international organizations. People are really, so if you have a diverse background and something like, don't shy away from saying it in your actual, nobody's asking you to put all your life story, out there, but some hints about, what you are interested in and why becomes really important, that, your life experience, to show that passion without saying I'm passionate about, because a lot of people think if you say I'm passionate about this, it's enough. No, you need a bit more meat for this to work. So add a bit of personal, especially for internship, add a bit of personal stories. I think that would be very helpful.
Right.
Sorry, I'm going to have to rush. So
yeah,
thank you so much. Take care.
Really appreciate
Bye.
you joining us. So Karen, any last thoughts before we head out?
No, I just want to thank you and ASOL for putting this together and inviting us. I really enjoyed hearing from the other panelists and seeing you, Christy and Melida, who I knew before. And yeah, to all the students, I would say, pursue this and do the work. And it is really rewarding. And as I said, happy to share some additional information that you can share along with the recording or the other materials on this.
Great. Well, thank you both so much. We're so honored that you would join us, and so grateful for all the advice and experiences that you've shared. I think that, one of the other notes here, or suggestions I would say from Bill Slomanson, who is my former international law professor, is to encourage law students or recent graduates to give lectures or highlight their experience at local libraries. That's a great way to learn more about these areas of law. So certainly if folks are looking for volunteer opportunities, go talk to your local library. That's a great idea. And we'll try to make the bios linkable in, I believe, the YouTube recording as well, so that folks can know where to find all of you. So thank you so much again. For those of you who haven't yet registered for the ASIL annual meeting, please do so. There will be many more discussions like this coming up. And once again, thanks so much to our speakers for all of your time and support.